Thank you so much. And it's just absolutely wonderful to be here this afternoon. And I must say this is a new thing for me, but that's okay. And my motto is laughter does good like a medicine. And I'm sure that a lot of you are probably taking some kind of medication. Well, I hope today, after you have finished listening, laughing a bit, I hope that you feel so much better. In fact, I must tell you that some years ago I was entertaining at a certain place in Brandon, and when I was finished with the show, I was so utterly blessed because a lady came up to me and she said, you know, I am in pain most of the time, but she said, after listening to you today, she said, my pain went away. And you know, I was just thrilled beyond words because laughter does really do good like a medicine. You know, we just celebrated Valentine's Day, so I thought I would just share this little story with you. There was a couple, their name is John and Mary, and they happen to live in Kansas. And Kansas is noted for having very bad storms and tornadoes. So this one day, or actually I should say this one night, they had a really bad storm, and it was so bad that it lifted the roof off the house. But the amazing part is that that storm picked the house up with John and Mary both lying in bed and set it down in another state. And when it was set down, Mary started to cry and she wept, and John says, why are you crying, Mary? He said, we are perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong. Nothing has happened to us physically. And Mary turns to her husband and she says, you know, John, this is the first time in 15 years that we've been out together. That's why I'm crying. You know, I called Chris, I believe, what's today's Wednesday? I believe I called him yesterday. And I said, Chris, I'm having a very bad problem. And Chris says to me, well, what is your problem? Well, I said, I have this really bad cold and I've had this bad cough and I don't think I'm going to be able to come out to the Herman Pryor Center tomorrow. And Chris says, well, have you called your family doctor? I said to myself, I wish I would have thought of that. So sure enough, I called my family doctor and I was talking to her, telling her my problems. And she said, oh, I've got the solution for you. And I said to her, well, what's that? Well, she said, you go to Shoppers Drug Mart and you buy a whole bar of X-Lax and you eat the whole thing. You know, you have it all at once. I said, really? I said, why would eating a whole bar of X-Lax, so why would that help my cough? And she said, well, she said, tomorrow you'll be afraid to cough. And you know, it's working. I haven't coughed at all today. So I'm going to share some personal things that have happened to me in my life, and I hope that you'll appreciate the humor in some of them. This was probably about lunchtime, and I wanted to start getting ready to come out, and would you believe that I couldn't find these boots? Now, I have enough shoes, I have enough boots, and I have them under the beds, I have them in the closets. And so I was starting to look for my boots, and it reminded me of the time that my late husband and I were supposed to go out to meet some friends for dinner. He wore a hearing aid. Nothing wrong with wearing a hearing aid. He wore a hearing aid, but he had a bad problem. He would take his hearing aid out because it came sometimes very irritating for him, so he would take it out of his ear, he'd lay it down, and he couldn't find it. And I kid you not, this happened that day too. And we went throughout our entire house. Sometimes he would take it out, he would lay it down on the windowsill. We checked everywhere. Could not find that hearing aid. So lo and behold, we ended up in the bathroom, both at the same time. And I saw this object. Well, actually, we saw it both at the same time lying on the counter. So he goes to pick it up, and he's just about to put it into his ear when I saw what it was. I said, "No, John," I said, "don't do that." I said, "That's not your hearing aid, that's a suppository." And you know what he said to me? "Oh," he said, "now I know where my hearing aid went last night." Now, some things I tell you, they are true, and some things may be true, but I will not tell you which is which. You're going to have to figure that out yourself. Well, anyway, so I was married for nearly 41 years, and I was actually 12 years old when I met my late husband. Absolutely true. We started dating when I was 14, absolutely true, and we married when I was 16, absolutely true. And when you've been with somebody for a long time and you've been married to them for many, many years, and then you're suddenly left by yourself, you know, life can be challenging, and I'm sure that there are a lot of you here that have experienced the same thing. Well, I felt I was still young enough to probably get married again, and I had enjoyed being married. So lo and behold, I went on a dating site, and I have heard from a lot of you that you have done the same thing, and that's good. So anyway, I happened to meet this gentleman, and so we had some good times together, and he told me several stories that I would like to pass on to you today. The first story he told me was that when he was a youngster, he lived in an area called West St. Paul, and everybody in that area was Catholic. Nothing wrong with being Catholic. Everybody in that neighborhood was Catholic except for one Baptist. And I have told this story lots of places. The Catholics that are at the shows will inevitably say, yes, this is true, and I'm going to tell you. Years ago, they used to have at Lent that you had to eat fish on a Friday. And so these Catholics, they faithfully ate fish. And faithfully every Friday, the Baptists in their neighborhood barbecued steak without fail. Well, after a while, the Catholics, they got tired of that. And who wouldn't? You know, you're having fish faithful every Friday. The guy down the street is barbecuing steak and you can smell it. So they decided to come up with a plan. So the Catholics all went to the Baptist house and they said, look, we are downright sick and tired of smelling your barbecuing steak while we're eating fish. So we've come up with a plan. How would you like to become a Catholic? Oh, he said, sure, that's no problem. So they all walked down to the church and they talked to the priest. They told him the story, and so the priest said, sure, you can become Catholic. And so the Catholics kind of stepped back and they wondered, well, how is this Baptist going to become Catholic overnight? And so the priest happened to have some water there. He took some in his hand and he poured it over the Baptist's head, and he said, you were born a Baptist and you were raised a Baptist and you are now a Catholic. Well, everybody's happy, everybody goes home. Would you believe that next Friday, as the Catholics are faithfully eating their fish, once again they smell the barbecuing steak? They could not believe this. So they all marched over to the Baptist house and they went to his backyard, and here he is, has a great big barbecue, the biggest piece of steak you ever would see. And they said, what do you think you are doing? We thought you became Catholic. And he too doesn't say anything, but he happens to have some water. So he goes to the water, he puts his hand in the water, walks over to the steak and he pours it on there, and he says to the piece of steak, you were born a cow and you were raised a cow, but you are now a fish. I tell you, So he told me another story, and this is really, really interesting. He said years ago, he had a friend who happened to be a nun, a very good friend of his. And one day the Mother Superior said to the nun, oh, and she happened to live in Winnipeg. And she said, I'm sending you to Chicago. And for some kind of a conference, some kind of training. And his friend, the nun, was just super excited. She'd never, ever flown before. She'd never left Winnipeg. So she gets to the airport super early. And she sits there in just amazement at all the people walking by. And all of a sudden, she notices there's a scale. Now, some of you will know what I'm talking about, some might not. But it's a scale that a person stands on, and it has a high back to it, and then you put a quarter in it, and then it tells you something. It tells you your fortune or something like that. And she is thrilled beyond words, so she goes there, she puts a quarter in it, she stands on the scale, and the scale says to her, you are a nun, you weigh 120 pounds, and you're on your way to Chicago. Oh my heavens. She couldn't believe it. She jumped off that scale and she went and sat down. She thought, I don't know what this thing is, but she's kind of curious. So she goes back, she puts in another quarter, and it says to her, you are a nun, you weigh 120 pounds, and you are about to play a musical instrument. And she is shocked. She jumps off the scale and thinks, well, I've never even touched a musical instrument before. And as she's thinking that, she looks down on the floor. In a beautiful red velvet case is a violin, or some people call it a fiddle. And without thinking, she picks it up and she starts to play without realizing that she really can't play, so she quickly sets it down. Well, here she is. She's still got lots of time to board her flight, so she thinks, oh, I think I'll try that scale again. So she gets on the scale, puts in another quarter, and the scale says, you are a nun. You weigh 120 pounds, and you are about to pass gas. Honestly, she couldn't believe that. She goes to jump off the scale. As she jumps, she trips. And so she doesn't want to fall, so she leans over and she grabs a hold of that back part of the scale. And as she's standing like that, the unthinkable happened. She happened to pass gas, and she's mortified, you know, and she has one more quarter left. Now, I wouldn't have done this, but she did. She got on that scale, and she put in her last quarter, and as she did, the scale says to her, you are a nun, you weigh 120 pounds, and with all your fiddling and farting around, you just missed your flight to Chicago. Well, so what shall I say? I guess our relationship went kind of south. And so a few months down the road, I happened to get a message from a tall, lanky redhead who lived in Brandon. Absolutely true. And we chatted for a little bit, and then we decided that we would meet. He was going to come to Portage, meet me for coffee. And so that's what we did. I think it was about 1 week later. And I pulled up with my car, and he pulled up with his, and I got out, and we said hello to each other. And then I just stood and looked at him. And I guess I might have stared a little bit. I don't know what. I looked at him and finally started checking his hair, and he checked his shirt collar, and he said, is everything all right? Oh, yes, I said, everything is all right. you just happened to remind me of my second husband. And he said, your second husband? He said, how many times have you been married? And I said, once. And just so you know that we met on August, the beginning of August 2010, and we were married 3 months later. And so I just want to share with you some things that happened. You know, what I always tell people, it doesn't matter if you date 3 months, 3 years, you don't know a person, you don't really know them unless you are with them 24/7, and that's what happened to Tom and I. What I should say, I should backtrack and say that when I met Tom and as we started dating and we're talking of marriage, Tom's last name happened to be Hepner. My maiden name happened to be Hepner, and this is all true. And so when I was talking to my cousins and to my oldest brother, and they both said to me, you know, Ruth, you and Tom are very likely related. When I shared that with my children, my son said to me, oh, he said, that's okay, Mom, you go ahead and get married, just don't have any kids. And so far, so good. There haven't been any little Hepners running around the house. But what I wanted to tell you, that you don't know a person until you are with them 24/7. I quickly found out that Tom still has the first dime he ever earned, and I like to go shopping. He likes to go to McDonald's because the seniors get their second cup of coffee free. I prefer to go to Tim Hortons. And then to go out on a fancy evening, he prefers Wendy's, where I prefer the keg. So we decided to compromise. We decided to go out twice a week. Tom goes on Tuesdays, I go on Thursdays. And so far that seems to be working quite well. But I want to share with you that we started dating in August, and it was very hot that summer. And so one Sunday after church, he came over to the house. And as he got out of his car, I happened to notice he had 2 black eyes. Now you have to know Tom to realize he would never hurt anybody. So he comes inside the house, and I said, how come you have 2 black eyes? Were you in a fight? Oh no, he said, I happened to be in church this morning and it was really, really hot. And so he said the air conditioning had stopped working. So he was sitting in the last pew, and as he got up, he noticed the lady in front of him had a slight problem. And ladies, you'll know what I mean when I tell you this. When we've been sitting too long and we're wearing a skirt and it's hot, and then we stand up, we sometimes have a bit of a problem. And so he noticed that her skirt was tucked in, and so he felt sorry for her, so he reached across the pew and he pulled her skirt out, and she turned around and she decked him. Well, I said, I can understand that, but why would you have 2 black eyes? Well, he said, I thought she liked it that way, so tucked it back in. So another day, he was going to come over, and I wanted to make a fancy dinner for him. And I found out that he liked angel food cake, loved angel food cake. So I wanted to make one. And so I made this angel food cake from scratch. And I tell you, ladies, you would have been so proud of me because it just looked like it was just perfect. And so I had baked the cake, and I thought, well, I really should put some fancy frosting on it. So I did that. I put some really nice white fluffy frosting on it. And then I looked at it and I thought, oh my heavens, I do really need to put something else on there to a finishing touch. So I checked my cupboards and I saw this box of, I forget the name of them. They are little silver candies that we used to put on to wedding cakes. And so I started to decorate it, and I ran out. Well, now what? It was too late to run downtown to pick up something else. Oh, and I really wanted this cake to look special. Wow, I remembered my late husband was a hunter. So I ran downstairs, and sure enough, I found a box of BB pellets. And they totally matched these. Oh yes, they're called silver dragons. That's what they're called. And so I thought, I'm going to just put the BB pellets on this side of the cake, and if I serve Tom this side, nothing's going to happen. So he comes over, and sure enough, he enjoyed the dinner. We had a really good time, and he ate 3 slices of angel food cake. I thought everything went well, and everything did go well until he called me the next morning, and he said to me, Ruth, what did you put into that angel food cake? And I said, why do you ask? And he said, well, I bent down to feed my cat and I shot the canary. So these things can happen. You have to always be careful what you do. You have to plan ahead. So it must have been before the snow fell. One day I heard a knock on my front door. So I go through the porch and go through the front door and open the door, and there stands my ex-mother-in-law. And she said, hi, and I said, hello. And she said, do you mind if I stay here for a few days? And I said, absolutely, you can stay here a few days. And then I shut the door. You know, there was this couple. They were married. They were about to celebrate their 20th wedding anniversary. So this one night, the lady wakes up. It's about midnight, and she sees that her husband is not lying beside her in bed. So she gets up. She puts her house coat on. She puts her slippers on, and she walks downstairs looking for him. And she happens to walk down the hallway, and she looks into the kitchen door, and there sits her husband. He's sitting at the table, has a cup of coffee in front of him, and he's just kind of staring off into space. And as she watches him, she sees a solitary tear roll down his face. And so she steps into the kitchen and she says, honey, how come you're sitting down here by yourself? And he looks up at her and he says, do you remember when you were 17 years old and we just started to date? And she thinks that he's very romantic, and she just thought, what a lovely thing to say. And she said, yes, why yes I do. He takes another sip of his coffee, and then he says, do you remember when your dad caught us kissing in the back seat of my car? And she said, yes I do remember that. And now the words are coming a little bit harder, like he's trying to talk, but he's crying a little bit more. And then he says, do you remember when your dad shoved a shotgun in my face and said, either I would marry you or he'd send me to prison for 20 years? And she knelt down beside him and she put her arms around him and she said, yes I do remember. And now the tears are flowing down his face and he's trying to wipe them away. And he chokes out the words, I would have gotten out today. So let me tell you about another couple. They were married 49 years, 364 days. And this lady was married to a man who absolutely never listened to anything she said. And so she thinks to herself, you know, I've given almost my entire life to this man, and he never listens to anything I say. He never takes me serious. So she thought, I'm going to give him one more chance. So she says to him, honey, I'm having an affair. And he nonchalantly replied, are you having it catered? you know, there were these 5 girls, and they were friends. They were 15 years old, and one day after school they met, and between the 5 of them, they had $6, and they decided to go to the Dairy Queen. So they went together to the Dairy Queen, and they had a really, really good time. Well, 10 years goes by, and these girls decide that they should get together and they should meet for dinner. So the 5 of them got together and they said, well, where do you think we should go? And they all came up with the idea they would go to the Ocean View Cafe because the band was good, the cover charge was not that much. So they went, and they all had a wonderful, wonderful time. Well, 10 years goes by, and the ladies are now 35 years old. And they met up again, and they said, you know, we haven't gone out together for a long time. Why don't we go out again? And they decided, yes, they would like to go to the Ocean View Cafe because it wasn't too far from the gym. And if they went early, there wouldn't be too many crying kids. So that's what they did. And they had a wonderful, wonderful evening. Another 10 years goes by, and these 5 girls, they're still friends, met up again, and they said, you know, we really should do dinner again. And they said, you know what? Why don't we go to the Ocean View Cafe, because we heard they have very nice looking waiters there. And so they went there, had a wonderful evening. Well, another 10 years goes by, and these girls are now 55. And they get together and they said, you know, we really should go to the Ocean View Cafe because they have windows that open just in case anybody has a hot flash. And so they did that. Would you believe another 10 years goes by? And these girls, they met up again, and they said, you know, we really should do dinner. And yes, they all agreed that they would go to the Ocean View Cafe. And the reason they chose it was if they went early, they could get the senior special. And they had a real good time. So another 10 years goes by. These ladies are now 75 years old, and they're still friends, met up again. They said, you know, we really should have dinner. Yeah, they said, we should, and we should go to the Ocean View Cafe because it's handicap accessible. So these ladies all went. Would you believe that another 10 years goes by, and by now these ladies are all 85 years old, and they met up together, decided, where should we go for dinner? You know what? They all agreed they would love to go to the Ocean View Cafe because they had never been there before. So before I leave, there's one story that I wanted to tell you, which was about my husband, Tom. And he told me this, that when he was a young man, he was a furniture salesman, and he did really, really well. He worked for, I believe it was called the Fair Furniture in Winnipeg, which has now changed names. But anyway, he worked there, and he did such a good job that they decided to send him to Montreal for a convention. Now, Tom could not understand French, and he didn't speak French either. But he finished his conference or whatever he went to, decided to go out for dinner. And so he went to this really nice restaurant, and there was a lady. She was his age, early 20s, and she was very attractive. She sat across from him, and he kind of motioned to her, and she came and joined him at his table. Now, she was French. She couldn't understand any English. She couldn't speak English. So Tom thought to himself, how am I going to communicate with this lady? Well, so he takes a serviette or a napkin, and he draws a picture on it, and he draws a picture of some food. And she nodded her head, so he ordered some food, and so however, they communicated. And after a while, he took the napkin again, and this time he drew a picture of a couple dancing. And she nodded her head, so they got up and they went on the dance floor, and they had a really good time together. So they came and sat down, and this time the lady takes a serviette and she draws a picture on there. She drew a picture of a 4-poster bed. And to this day, Tom cannot figure out how she knew he was a furniture salesman. Now there's one more thing I want to tell you before I go. I want to tell you about Frank and Edna. Frank and Edna lived in the States, and every year they went to the state fair without fail, every year. And every year when they went, there was this helicopter sitting there, and he would, the helicopter pilot would give people rides. And every year, Frank would ask Edna, he'd say, Edna, I really would like to have a helicopter ride. And every year, Edna says to him, no. She said, a helicopter ride costs $50, and $50 is $50. Well, this went on year after year after year. Finally, last summer, they went, and the helicopter is sitting there, the pilot is sitting or standing outside the helicopter, and Edna, or Frank just looks at it and he says, oh, Edna, he said, I'm 95 years old, and if I don't have a helicopter ride pretty soon, I'll pass away and I'll never, ever have had this dream fulfilled. And I would have thought that Edna would have been more sympathetic, but no, she wasn't. She said, Frank, she said, a helicopter ride costs $50, and $50 is $50. But this year, the pilot is standing there, and so he hears what they said. So he comes up to them and he says, tell you what. He said, I'm going to make a deal with you. I will take you up on that helicopter, and I will give you a ride. And if neither one of you yells or screams or anything, I'll pay the $50. If one of you yells or makes any noise, you pay the money. Would you believe Edna said yes? And they climbed into that helicopter. And I tell you, that pilot did whatever he could. He flew upside down, he dropped it, he flew sideways, whatever. And Frank was having the time of his life. I wish you could have seen him. The smile on his face was unbelievable. So when they landed, the pilot looks over his shoulder at Frank and he said, Frank, I am amazed. He said, I tried whatever I could to make you yell. But he said, nothing, you were totally quiet. Well, Frank says it was hard when Edna fell out, but $50 is $50. So I thank you so much for joining me today. I just had a real good time. I hope you did. And laughter does really do good, like a medicine. And maybe, who knows, after all, you might not have to be on that medication. Laugh a day keeps the doctor away. Bless you all.